I'm going to hit record. So good afternoon, everybody. Why I'm not moving there, and turn on my laser pointer. Okay, so degree day wise, we have just totally leaped forward in the last week, actually the last 2 weeks. So if you kind of look at the running total on the bottom, we were a week or almost 2 weeks, 2 weeks base 50 behind a month ago, or less than a month ago. And now we're at dead even with normal averages. For base 42, the Sparta station is at 899 as of midnight last night. 894 is the normal average. So we're right kind of dead even. And yesterday we were even for base 50 at the end of Monday, but with yesterday's warm temperatures, we actually climbed a little bit ahead for base 50, which is totally amazing to me that we went from 2 weeks behind. And base 50 is warmer. It's harder to make that up when you have when you start so far behind. So it's quite amazing to me to see that. I did run the totals. This last column here is just the rainfall up till this morning. So quite variable across the region. And of course, there's more storms moving in right now. I can't make any rhyme nor reason from north to south, but it is quite variable. The one that surprises me is the Grant Station at 0.23. And when I show you the scab information later on, you'll see that they actually have had more wet hours than some of the other stations, yet they've had less overall rainfall. But that site is in a lower area, so there's probably some relative humidity that's coming into play. And then the air is certainly moist out there, so it's going to continue our scab infection. I'll come back to that. So I grabbed this radar this morning, but I showed it to you live, and I know you're kind of living through it right now, and I can hear Chuck Rash's hail cannon, I think, going off now. He was practicing it earlier today, so just keep an eye on this. Looks like we're going to have kind of some pop-up showers like this through the day today. The forecast from Channel 8 is showing the storms likely today and some winds moving in with much milder temperatures, still warmer than normal averages, but definitely not as warm as the 90 or above that some people saw yesterday. And they've extended a little bit for some chance of showers into Thursday, but I think that's going to be real hit or miss. And this isn't going to continue Wednesday into Thursday. But there are some frontal boundaries that are moving through, so that's why they have that in there. But after that, the temperatures this is my kind of week. I like temperatures in the low 70s and, right around 50 for nighttime temperatures. So we're continuing this up and down roller coaster with the weather. And of course, they've got some warmer things moving back into next week. The one thing that's pretty obvious in this forecast is absolutely no rain for almost 5 or 6 days here. Now that can change, of course, but a lot of the forecasts you look at have us in a fairly dry period moving forward here. So I know Phil's going to talk about irrigation, and we kind of got caught up on rainfall, but we'll quickly go backwards if this long dry period does come to be. For Wonderground, they're showing shower. I grabbed this morning, so some strong storms through the afternoon here. You can see all the blue. And then high pressure moves in. That's the black line is barometric pressure. That's why we're having those nice bright clear days for several days in a row. And very little chance of rain. This blue section here is showing the chance of precipitation, and it's very low over the next several days. And you can see there's 0, 0, 0, 0 all the way across here till next Friday. So that, again, can change, but it's showing us a bit of a pattern. So that something to keep in mind, that you maybe have to run your irrigation. Just quickly with the Apple Pest Guide and those degree days, we're right where we should be matched up very well with the stage right here at first cover with, you know, about 800 degree days base 42 and about I think we're at almost 500 degree days base 50. So you can use this chart to help you determine things. So let's go through some of that. I'm going to start with Plum Curculio, and they are declining. I'm just keeping it in there because we typically still consider managing for that when we get to first cover. But they've had some great warm nighttime temperatures to lay all their eggs. They only have a certain number of eggs coming into the spring, and once they're all done laying, when they have the right weather and they're done laying all those eggs, they're done. And I think we're done early this year. The degree day model that can be used is putting us at about 50% done with egg laying. So 3 to 5 more days will get us to 100, but I really feel like I don't see any new fresh scars. And I'll share this funny little picture. I sent this picture, Jim Engels was sent to me a couple weeks ago, and our dear colleague, Dr. Bill Shane, made a funny out of it. So this, if you're familiar with Guardians of the Galaxy and IM Group. So just thought I would share that with you. Codling moth, we are now at just crossed over the 250 degree day mark for base 50 since my biofix on May 25th. I know many of you have different biofixes. If you had high pressure, perhaps you biofix a little sooner. If you had low pressure, perhaps a little later. But this is the traditional egg hatch timing, the early 3% egg hatch for any blocks that are over threshold, over accumulation of 5 moths per trap.
At this point, I lost my internet connection due to the storm that was moving through. So Phil Schroyer took over with his presentation. However, in the short time that I was not on, the recording was stopped. So you're going to come into Phil's video here kind of a few minutes into it. So I apologize for that. And when Phil's finished with his presentation, you will see the rest of my insect and disease presentation at the end. Again, I apologize for the inconvenience, but there was a tropical storm moving through, so it kind of put a wrench in things for a bit. So again, we apologize.
So then when you're late thinning, you can add oil or surfactant to try to increase thinning if you need it. I wouldn't think that we really need oil. Trees seem to be setting very lightly, they thin easily. So I don't think you need a surfactant. I don't think you need oil at this time. And beware, if you are putting oil on, beware of caftan injury if you're spraying caftan. I think the tops of trees are where you might need some thinning. So concentrate your sprays in the tops. Spray the top half of the tree. And if you have frost damage, most certainly concentrate it only in the tops, don't spray the bottoms. Use tree row volume rate, and I'm going to review this briefly here in a second. A tall spindle is usually about 200 gallons per acre tree row volume type canopy. If you hedge your tall spindles or make them into a narrow tall spindle, it's somewhere between 1x and 2x. And the tree row volume will help get the right rate per canopy volume. So use this as a guide. So I showed you this before, but here is tall spindle. If it's 6 foot wide, 13 feet tall, and 12-foot row spacing, that's about 198 gallons of water doing the calculations. And so therefore, that's about 2x. And I showed you this before. If you have a narrow tall spindle on the left here, that's about 100 gallons of water to be dilute equivalent. And a tall spindle, wide, normal tall spindle is about 8 ounces of NaA, or 200 gallons. 2x is what you need to put on. So let me talk some more about late thinning. For the rate, if you have frost damage or feel uncomfortable, but there's a lot of flowers on 1-year-old wood, and those flowers will set fruit. Now, maybe you might need some of those flowers to set fruit. In that case, don't thin too heavily, otherwise you're going to knock all those fruit off the 1-year-old wood. And as I've already said, probably don't need 1 quart of oil yet at this stage, or regulate at this stage. But maybe if you find you're in trouble next week sometime, then you probably got to add something to heat it up a bit, and that would be regulate. Looks like we're going to have warm temperatures again next week, and your thinner next week it's really iffy if it will work. But if you're desperate, you can try it one more time. I think this is the end of the thinning window. This week, right now, is your last chance to really get some thinning reliably. In the past, we've talked about using Esro at 1 pint per 100 plus oil, but I find that to be too variable and unreliable and dangerous. If, for example, you put Esro on sometime next week and the temperature really go hot, 90 degrees or so, they can smoke all the fruit on the tree. So it's variable, it's unreliable, it's dangerous. I encourage you not to do that. I know we have done that in the past. You need good coverage. Use the tree row volume rates. The tops of trees I've already mentioned. And if they're still too thick, consider pruning the clusters off the tops as another alternative. Once again, be aware that you can get captan injury with oil on the same tree. I'd like to move into water use. We have my screen disappeared. Go back. We have a model at Cornell that predicts the fruit trees need, apple trees need for water on a daily basis, which is more accurate than the typical irrigation water use models we've had in the past, which were based on grass and alfalfa and crops. Well, this is a more accurate prediction for apple crop. And typically, during June, we use about 3,000 gallons of water per day per acre. An acre inch is 27,154 gallons of water. So in 7 days, a little bit over 7 days, we need an inch of rain during June to fill in that water gap, or you got to irrigate an inch of water per week. Then in July and August, that goes up to 1.5 inches per week. So here's where we are right now. Here's what the model predicts for us as of before the rain at noon. At 11 o'clock before the rain came in. We were in a zero deficit, so the ground is saturated. And it's predicted to be a negative 12,000 gallons by June 15th per acre. Well, 27,000 is where you will use up that acre inch. If you're on sandy soil, when we get that inch gone, we need to start irrigating. And I know that some of you started irrigating last week when it was really hot on sandy soil. They really needed it. The lawns started burning up. Well, now they're going to be reinvigorated, and you will be able to get another week. If you look at the transpiration of water for apples for 2020 for Sparta, we are currently at zero. On June 10th here, we're at zero right down here on June 11th. But it predicts if we don't get rain, somewhere around a week from now, we will have used up an inch of water, and then sandy soils can hold about an inch of water per acre foot. Clay soils hold about 2 inches of water per acre foot, so they can survive an extra week. But next week you will be in a deficit situation on sandy soils, and we'll have to start irrigating probably on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week if we don't get more rain. Now we get an inch of rain today. Looks like we're getting an inch right now. 70% of that rain is effective. 30% of it is not effective. That's a rule of thumb. If it comes down an inch in a half hour, then probably 50% of it's effective. Most of it runs off. So take that into mind when you're calculating how much deficit you might have. And that concludes what I was going to talk about. I still have not received any. You're on?
I'm on. Yep.
Yep.
My internet just totally went down. So, but my house is still standing. It got really, really windy. So I can go back and.
Yeah. I will turn it back to you.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Phil, for taking over. That's wonderful. Let's see what I can do here. I'm going to leave my video off just in case the internet's not totally still stable. So, okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm glad you kept right on it going.
Listening to your.
Yeah. What's wrong? And I'm tired.
So, I think I left off with codling moth and that we were right in that traditional egg timing.
Are you still?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
You keep muting me.
You keep me. Okay.
If you're trying to see when people are talking, they go to the top of the list of participants, and then you can just click on them, hover over it, and you can mute them individually. So anyway, so degree day wise, we're right right here at this 3% early egg hatch timing, 259 degree days from a May 25th biofix. And this is using Sparta data, and really it probably applies to most of the stations. If you are in a low pressure situation, Larry Goot will often tell us, you can use 350. And of course you have to be monitoring with traps. If you're over 5 moths accumulated per trap, that threshold in non-disrupted blocks, then you need to spray accordingly. But if you are very low pressure, you could push that first target spray out to 350, which is a week from now, or 5-6 days from now, June 15th. But the traditional timing is right now. So if you haven't put anything out there for codling moth yet, as soon as all this rain moves out, you're going to want to get started on that if you're over threshold. If you're doing disruption, then you use your traps to help you make decisions. Your 1X traps help you make decisions on that. And again, 1 or 2 moths, the threshold is 1. If a male moth can find a 1X trap, it's likely he can find a female. And so if you're catching them in your 1X traps, that means that your population is high enough that you need to overlay something on top of your disruption. And then the 10X traps, I think I explained this last week, but just to be clear, the 10X traps are just there to kind of tell you what the background noise is. You don't use 10X traps or CMDA lures to make spray decisions from. They're just to tell you kind of what's going on in the background, particularly if you've been disrupting for a long time and you're not catching any moths in your 1X traps. It's a little disconcerting because then you wonder are your lures good? Is everything working the way it's supposed to? And that's what the 10X trap or the CMDA is, a combination lure. It catches males and females. And all our thresholds are based off from male trap catches. So unless you can identify males and females, some people say they can. I haven't perfected that talent yet. So um, then you can use that if you're only judging based on males. So next up are aphids, and with all the lush foliage that's out there, you can find aphids. Most people put good pink sprays on, well timed, and I don't see a lot of rosy aphids. But in unsprayed trees, they're out there and all curled up like in this picture. And just in the last few days, I've started to see some beneficial, some lacewing larvae and some midge larvae in there, which is good. They're helping as well. But one to keep an eye on. Oblique banded leaf roller are getting large, and I'm hearing a little bit more from different people that they're starting to see higher numbers of OBLR larvae that they haven't seen in the past. So do be scouting for them. They're all about ready to go into the to be pupating and start flying as adults, and some people may have already caught a few. And we'll set a biofix for that to go after them for summer generation. But it's something to keep an eye on. They've kind of got really knocked back in the days when Ryman first showed up, and now, but I think they're starting to recover. So it's one to keep on your radar screen. San Jose scale, males are flying. I set a biofix for June 1, and we've accumulated 151 degree days since then based on Sparta Weather Station data. And this uses base 51 for scales, but the first crawlers don't typically emerge till around 400 degree days. So I extrapolated that out, and that's going to be the last week of June, or the 24th, 25th, 26th, kind of depends on what the weather actually turns out to be. But so we're kind of in a stage right now where there's really not much you can do for San Jose scale until those crawlers start to show up. And then for Oriental fruit moth, we're at 404 degree days. And if you look at the model, that tells us that's peak egg hatch, right around 400 degree days. So we don't worry about OFM in apples traditionally. Perhaps it could be an issue in young trees, unsprayed trees that aren't getting the normal management. But that's usually a very set conditions, like maybe you're next to a peach orchard, or the times I've seen it is when a peach orchard nearby a new apple orchard was taken out, and all those OFM had to have somewhere to go. So we don't usually see it in apples, but sometimes nursery trees can be affected. So just keep an eye on that. If you see flagging, your first thought, of course, might be fire blight, but if you look a little closer and you see a little spot of frass, or slice that open carefully with your knife, you can see that someone was feeding on there, particularly if you don't see any oozing from fire blight and you're wondering what it is. But for peaches, you're at your peak egg hatch timing to prevent this flagging. And with peaches, you want to maximize your shoot growth because that's where your fruit comes in the following years. So don't let your guard down for OFM right now. And looking ahead, I think that will come to an end in a couple of weeks, and then second generation starts immediately after that. European red mites, I can find all different stages now, and a few new eggs. So the adults have already started laying eggs. These are in unmanaged blocks. So they're moving fast. I'm sure this heat is really pushing them along, as would be expected. So keep an eye on that. It could be this year that our petal fall miticides might break early on us, and we're going to have to really be watching carefully for red mites and other mites as well. There are some leafhoppers out there. The white apple leafhoppers now they're in this larger nymph stage, or they might even be adults. This storm that just passed by, and the rain that has come from Tropical Storm Cristobal, has origins in the Gulf of Mexico, and so oftentimes it'll pick up potato leafhoppers along the way and literally rain them down on us. And there have been some potato leafhoppers around. Bright green adults are usually easy to distinguish from the nymphs of white apple leafhoppers at this time, but once they're all in various stages, it can be kind of hard to tell them apart. It doesn't really matter, they do fairly similar damage. and just keep an eye on them. And so if you see all of a sudden a bunch of leafhoppers after the storm moves through, they're probably potato leafhoppers. I had taken to tarnished plant bug out of the report, but I put it back in because I can see adults now moving around on the orchard floor. They're feeding on broadleaf weeds, but then if you're particularly peaches are in a vulnerable stage right now. And this isn't my picture, but I have seen small little damage. And anytime you damage a peach, it gums. It makes the sticky gummosis, and it's just a little pinprick mark underneath there. I think it might be tarnished plant bug. I'm not sure, but something certainly to keep your eye on. Black stem borer are still out there and active. Haven't heard of too many unsuspected cases of it. The people know if the trees are injured and weak and they perhaps are moving in. Maybe this insect is, it's kind of something we heard about in the literature 30 or 40 years ago, and it's been around for a few years. Maybe it's going to go back and be just something in the background. It's just an unusual thing to see it. I don't think it's going to be something that's with us forever, but I guess time will tell. And then the other borers that are out there, including dogwood borer, they should start flying at any time. I actually don't have a trap up somewhere yet, but it is the right time for them to fly. And I haven't seen the pupal cases, but I wouldn't be surprised if you can find burnouts like this on some of those M9 clone rootstocks, that you'll start seeing these little pupal cases sticking out. And they're usually empty, and that means the adult is out flying around. All the other borers, greater or just peach tree borer, lesser peach tree borer, apple plum borer, they're all flying now too. And in a couple of weeks, that's the time, well, probably, about 10 to 14 days, the timing for trunk sprays for stone fruits for those pests. And then dogwood borer for apples is usually around the 4th of July. So just a reminder that, there's a lot going on, and we're right on target for the time. The calendar's matching up perfectly with the apple pest guide for now. It'll change again, I'm sure. I just wanted to briefly touch on apple scab. This is a table that you can get from EnviroWeather, and it's the regional disease table. Online, it also has cherry leaf spot and some grape disease as well. I pulled those out just to make it fit better on this page. And these are the stations kind of around the ridge. I have another slide with those for those of you that are on from more west central. I'll show you. But you can see that the rain for most places, almost all the stations started between 7 and 8 o'clock last night, Tuesday night. A little later in Fremont, which that's the farthest north, so that kind of makes sense as the storm was moving from the south. And most areas have had, up until this last now re-wetting event, had 7 or 8 hours of wetting. Only needed a couple more hours to get an infection, and in fact, Grant had enough, Kent City had enough, and the Sparta Tower, again, was slightly different than the Sparta Station, which is 25 feet from it. For some reason, the tower read 10 hours of wetting up until this last rain, and the I don't call it the old Sparta station, but the regular, not tower station, had only 7. I haven't gone back and looked at the data, but it's probably relative humidity. There's probably some hours where it maybe dipped down at one and not the other. It just shows you how different things are from station to station. I would say by the time we're done with this phone call, probably most of the sites now will have moved into a light infection. I did go out and check spores this morning from the rain. I tried to wait as long as I could until I saw more rain coming. And when I got there at about 10 o'clock, they were still running. So things were still very wet, but I found no additional spores there. So it's likely that we could be at the end of primary. However, all that rain started late in the evening and it was all dark. And if I do catch any, it's going to be very small single numbers anyway. So I'll be curious to go back out here after this rain moved through and see if there's any last lingering spores, but I think we're getting to the very tail end here. We are well past the 1,000 degree days, base 32, so all spores should be mature. They probably have been mature for a week, so hopefully we're at the end. So I'm calling primary scab maybe over. Sorry. I just really want to go and check them and see what happened here with this daytime rain. Perhaps there's a few, but we're at the very end, and hopefully you were covered for this rain event because it was predicted. You know, at one time we were predicted to have 2 or 3 inches of rain. I wanted to. Oh, I better hit this first before I move on. These are the stations for those of you that are on from more west central area. So Shelby, Hart, Ludington, New Era. And very similar, your rain started about an hour later than down here on the ridge as that storm moved, as that rain moved from south to north. And you've had variable rainfall as well. So that's just the nature of these types of cells that are moving over. And so some areas have had already an infection. The rest of you just need a couple hours, which I'm assuming you're going to get yet today, to make this a potential light infection or moderate even. I did want to mention for the Sparta station that from earlier scab infections, I can see all lesions now based on when the leaves are out, when they were small, little tiny leaves, going back until the 17th. This one here on the 27th, this is Sparta data. That was a heavy infection, an inch of rain. It should be present, but I just haven't seen it yet. And then the rain, the scab last light infection period that we had on the 3rd of June is due to show up in a few days. So I guess I just wanted to put one final message out to you. You know, I know you want primary scab to be over, but there's a lot of lush, tender tissue, and some of these infections were extremely difficult. You know, seems like every one here, these 4 that we had, were all heavy infections with 3 inches of rain, 2 inches of rain, almost 3 inches of rain, another inch of rain. Extremely difficult to stay covered up well with your fungicide program at no fault of your own. So some scab is likely to have sneaked through, and I don't want you to back off on your primary fungicide rates only to find out next week sometime that some scab is showing up. So do be looking very, very carefully. And if you, I can see on the spore rods that I have out, I can see Conidia, which are the second generation, the secondary spore form that comes off from lesions. So there is the potential out there for additional spores. Just make sure you're good and clean. RimPro is showing a little bit of these little yellow bars here from the last night's rain, and this is for the rain that they could see or predict with their computer models for today. So they're saying perhaps some spores for today as well. And then of course it's dry moving out into the future. I think once we get through this rain period, it's certain that primary scab will be over, but it's likely I could catch a few spores yet this afternoon. And then Standale has got a little blip here yet for the rain today. I know you're a little bit farther ahead of us. Here, I blew that up so you believe me. There's a couple little bars there. So there's a potential for the last few spores, I think, in Standale as well, and they're farther to the south and more advanced. So I'm going to skip that. And I just wanted to briefly touch about fire blight. Of course, we're done with, yeah?
What would you say about Hart? You said that Sparta is maybe over in primary. What would you say?
Yeah. I haven't been tracking the degree days for Hart, but I'm guessing they're probably a couple days behind the Sparta. A lot of the degree days are pretty similar this year. They're not such a big stretch from south to north. So I can look that up, but I'm guessing that they're probably have matured all their spores, and now they just need a rain, maybe one additional rain, which this always happens when we get to the end. I tell you, you need one more rain to be sure, and then we don't get rain for 10 days. So, and certainly with this heavy rain and today rain during the day, it's likely that you probably are over with primary scab as well. But do be looking very carefully for lesions, because it's likely that some scab is going to sneak through this year. How's that for a non-answer?
So
I
it's
just, it's,
maybe. Oh,
it's a maybe over. Yeah. I would like for those areas to the north to maybe just make sure they have some cover out there for perhaps another 5 days beyond us. So, but I would probably overspray if I was a farmer. So. Just quickly about fire blight. So I ended the bloom back here on June 1, I guess, for the Sparta station. And I just wanted, of course, there's no risk to blossom. Well, if you have any bloom open, you know, some varieties have ragtag bloom. There's the potential that the rain on June 3rd, and then of course, if there's still bloom out there, there is a high potential for infection from this recent rain event. But if I turn bloom off, it turns off all these markers here for, you know, it doesn't tell us there's any infection risk anymore, and it stops the EIP. What I am starting to see some initial wilting. Actually, it's getting to be more of this stage, not so much around the ridge, but a few people are sending me some pictures. I'll show you one of those that I got from someone who will remain nameless, of course. But what I wanted to point out was in the Mary Blight model, it determines, it makes a guesstimate for canker margin symptoms. It also will start shoot blight symptoms. So shoot blight can show up if you have any blossom blight that gets started. So we had these extreme infection events with EIPs well over 300. And so this one would be labeled A, this is B, this is C, and this is D. So that's what these letters correspond to. So this, when we go over 100, this A infection, which is this first wedding event back here on the 26th of May, potentially could start showing up as wilted foliage. And that's what this picture here is, just the initial symptoms. It usually takes a day or two more for it to get brown and crispy and easier to see. And then B will show up the next day, C will show up the following day. And then I think D, if I had kept bloom going a little longer up here, it would have shown up for this following infection here. Regardless of that, if some fire blight showing up, that opens up the potential for shoot blight, and that's what this column starts to do. Shoot blight is just, you have so much tender foliage out there, and you have bacteria in the area because of potential blossom blight infections that it can actually just slight little damage to the tissue, or even so much bacteria it overcomes the tissue and can start shoot blight symptoms. Those are due to show up, if it did occur, to show up Saturday. The other thing I put in here was wind from yesterday. If I put wind in last night, I could put wind in again today. And what that starts is this fourth column, the trauma blight model. Wind is a hard one. How much wind is too much wind to, you know, cause the potential trauma? All you need, you know, bacteria, fire blight bacteria are microscopic. And so they only need a tiny little microscopic crack to actually get into tissues. And so if you're seeing leaves and branches on the ground, it's likely there's enough wind to cause damage to tender, you know, really tender foliage like this. And it allows the bacteria way in. So if we did have some violent wind from the storm last night or even today, that starts this trauma blight. And that usually takes about 8 or 9 days, 10 days for that to show up. If we get this cooler weather, it might take a little bit longer. 9 days with kind of normal temperatures is usually what it takes. So I guess my message, even though we're done with bloom, my message about fire blight is still be vigilant. And with this situation this year, we should be seeing a lot more blossom blight than we are. And I think that the reason we aren't is because of the use of apogee. So I think Phil mentioned it last week, you know, if it's time for your second apogee or maybe even third apogee, maybe keep those rates up. And if you're wondering, do I need that third one? I think you might this year. You definitely want to keep fire blight at bay, because I think it's one of the tools that's really doing a lot of work for us in the background. This picture was sent to me yesterday. So I put it up here to shock you a little, just to let you know that yes, fire blight is active and around. And I don't know the spray history or anything of this block. Of course, I'm not going to tell you who it's from, but I just wanted to show you this is what you're looking for. This initial ooze. This is a very active fire blight situation. It needs to be managed for. So there it is up close, just so you don't forget. And then just a couple final little things. Somebody sent me a picture of this on leaves today. This is what we call edema, edema. And it's spelled two different ways, either with an O or without an O. And it's basically, we see it, it's very common in greenhouses where they have very unique environmental conditions, inside a contained environment. But we do see it sometimes in apples. I saw it last year in the spring when we had all that rain. And basically the tissues take up water and they can't use it fast enough, or it can't be transpired through the leaves fast enough. And either it's under really cool conditions because the plants aren't transpiring, or under very warm conditions because the plants close up their stomates, and it's just some water confusion internally in the plant. So you get these little, the cells are leaky, and they create these little water soaked areas, which will eventually turn into little brown areas. And so I had an interesting question today about, could this be a wound and allow fire blight in? Which is a very good question given the situation we're in right now. After this turns brown, it'll get kind of this crusty looking, it heals over. That's an actual apple leaf with it. A few weeks from now, that's what they would look like. So I put this question about fire blight into George Sundin, and because my gut was telling me, no, I don't think it would. And he agreed, as long as this type of injury is on old leaves. The old leaves aren't really moving things back into the tree, and they're as much as young, tender foliages. And normally we do see this edema on older leaves. So he thought that it was less likely to cause an infection if that's where you were seeing it. So just a unique, funny thing this year. Also, Nectria is showing up a little bit. I don't think it's too bad this year, but it will fool you and you'll think it's fire blight. So Rome is very susceptible, as is Gala, but Northern Spy, these other varieties too. So just, if you first see this on any of these varieties, or with anything you're identifying, make sure you just look closely so you're identifying it well, and getting the right identification. And mildew's out there. All this hot weather has just been wonderful for mildew, so keep an eye on that. And then just finally, in the last week or so, I've gotten quite a few pictures from people. These are just a couple of them, of collapsing trees, and they're all young trees. So of course, we think of winter injury sometimes, but we had a very mild winter, so I don't think that's the case. But young trees sometimes are growing very actively into the fall, and so what might not hurt a well-established tree maybe could cause injury, cold damage to a young tree that's still actively growing. That's a possibility. This one here, I still not sure on the identification. Also, of course, don't forget about the roots. Half of your patient is buried under the ground, so maybe something's damaging the roots, or the roots sometimes don't grow well. These are newly planted trees, so they're still getting established. Rodent feeding at or below the soil level even is something you need to look for. Fire blight, of course, is a concern. This does look a little bit like fire blight, and of course samples were sent in to MSU to try to confirm that. If you don't see oozing, which was the case in this picture, no obvious oozing, and I believe in this one as well, just keep looking. And we really do, to confirm fire blight, you really do need to have oozing like in those pictures I showed earlier. It could be drought or flooding. We've certainly had some of those situations, and it up until, like Phil said, up until now, it's been a little on the dry side. Maybe these trees don't have that extensive root system, and so they're having a little bit of decline showing up. And in general, they're just not thriving, and that can be an issue for all of these reasons, potentially. So that was all I had. I apologize for the snafu with my internet. I'm glad I got back on, and I recorded from when I got on until now, so I missed the first part of Phil's recording. So I'll throw it up there on YouTube. It won't be pretty, but it's what we have. So I'm going to.
Amy, we're also seeing, or I'm also seeing some leaves that are turning brown and blotchy, probably from heat stress. They couldn't get enough water. And so some of the leaves are burning up a little bit. And we'll see some leaf drop from that over the next week or so.